Excellent. Tell him, Mr. Yeah, come on. Do it now, Ross.
If you please, Mr. Scrooge, it's gotten colder. And the bookkeeping staff would like to have an extra shovel full of coal for the fire.
We can't do the bookkeeping.
Yeah, all of our pens have turned to inksicles.
Our assets are frozen.
How would the bookkeepers like to be suddenly
Unemployed!
This is my island in the sun.
I believe you convinced them once again, Mr. Scrooge.
Hello everybody, Happy New Year, Merry Christmas, Happy Holiday, whatever you celebrate, whatever you don't celebrate. Basically, I hope you've just managed to rest up a bit over the past few days. I hope you've had, something nice to eat. I hope you got to see some friends and some family in a safe environment. And I really, really hope that 2021 is better than 2020. I'm not saying it even, has to involve us going back to the way things were prior to 2020. But if things could just be a bit better, if, we can get more of a handle on everything, that would really be great, wouldn't it? Anyway, today is my first kind of proper book review, and we're going to be talking about a very topical book. Look how professional I'm being. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I'll be honest, every time I say Charles Dickens, there's part of me that wants to say Charles Darwin. Two very different people. Both have pretty good beards, but one was, the guy that came up with the theory of evolution, and the other was a writer. So, yeah, A Christmas Carol. This is actually, A Christmas Carol is a very short story. This is a collection of Christmas-themed stories by Charles Dickens. Nearly said Darwin then. And he wrote a few Christmas themed ones, but A Christmas Carol is easily his most recognisable Christmas story and one of his most recognisable stories in general. If you're unfamiliar with Charles Dickens, he was a British writer in sort of the 1800s. He did things like Oliver Twist, A Tale of Two Cities, David Copperfield, which has that really famous opening line. I can't remember it verbatim, but if I turn out to be the hero of this novel or the villain these pages must tell. He also came up with the opening line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. I think that's The Tale of Two Cities. I could be wrong. I'm going to be honest with you, I haven't read a lot of Dickens. I should have really, but I haven't. I do like him. I just, we can't read everything, can we? But anyway, yeah, today we're going to be talking about A Christmas Carol. Now, if you are at all in the know with popular culture, if you've watched any major TV show, The Simpsons, Family Guy, Blackadder, God, this story has been parodied so many times. I would even be willing to say that it is probably the most parodied story of all time. There have been so many homages to it, so many adaptations, so many, telling the same story from different perspectives. I feel like pretty much every other year there's a new adaptation of A Christmas Carol. And the reason for that is because it's a really, really, really good story. It's really good. Now, I want to be honest here and say that I was in my mid-20s before I actually read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. But obviously I was super familiar with the story because I'd seen it parodied so many times. And I think that's kind of a passing curiosity, that this is a story that I would be willing to bet most people haven't read, but most people know the story of, which is, I don't know how many other books or anything you can say that about, really. But it is definitely true of A Christmas Carol. There have been loads of movies. About 10 years ago, there was an animated film with Jim Carrey that was really good. There's a classic one, I think, that was made in like the 50s. There's a Muppet Christmas Carol, which, in case you don't know, is my favourite adaptation of it. I think it's just fantastic. And yeah, so this was a story I was super familiar with. And I was like, well, hang on, I think I should actually read the original novel, because it's this book that gets so much praise and we're all so familiar with it in popular culture, and I hadn't read it, so I thought, well, as a reader I should really check it out, shouldn't I? So a few years ago around Christmas I picked up this copy, and I read it through, and I really wasn't surprised. I really was surprised, sorry, at how much of a punch it had. You know, going into it, I wasn't really expecting much. I was just kind of like, oh, I'll check out the original source material, and you know, just so I can say I have really, and it's something nice to read at Christmas, isn't it? But I think there are loads of great adaptations out there, but I still think the best version of A Christmas Carol is Charles Dickens' version. Is fantastic, and I really wasn't prepared, to be honest, at the risk of sounding a bit sappy here, how emotional it made me and how much of a kind of punch it delivers to the reader. And I think that is why, you know, coming up for 200 years now, I think it's like 170 odd years old, coming up for 200 years, it still endures, and it's still this book that people love and adore and want to adapt and things like that. So yeah, I just wanted to talk in this video about why I think that's the case and why I think it's so good. So since I started reading it, I've tried to make an effort to read it every year. I don't always achieve that because the holiday period is so damn busy, but I do try and read it every year, not just because it's a good book, but because I think it reminds us of important things that we should try and remember around the holiday season, and if we can, try and remember throughout the year. Obviously, you'll know this is a book about some ghosts that try to change Scrooge's ways, make him embrace Christmas, be more generous, be less unkind to the people around him. And throughout the book, there's this thing where they say they don't want him to just celebrate Christmas, they want him to keep it all year long. And I think that's an important message. That's something Charles Dickens is trying to say to the reader. I feel like Charles Dickens, in this book, he is talking as much to the person reading it as he is talking to Scrooge. These ghosts are talking to us, not just Scrooge. Now, I'm not for a minute going to say that everyone who reads this book, or even most people who read this book, are as mean as Scrooge. Scrooge is meant to be a kind of personification of the negative feelings that we all have, and that can particularly get the better of us during, the holiday period. And I don't think we should, beat ourselves up too much about feeling negative during these times. The holiday period is extremely stressful, okay? Work is always busier. It's been especially bad this year because some people haven't had jobs, some people have had jobs and therefore have had even more of a workload. But even in general, Christmas and the holidays are a stressful time. It's a lot of money. If you've got kids, you want to make sure they have a good time, but at the same time, what can you afford? You want them to feel like they're getting good stuff, but, we can't all afford a brand new bike or an iPod or whatever. An iPod? God, I'm old. An iPad. Having to see people you might not really want to see. It just stresses like getting all the food in. Can you fit the entire family round? That wasn't a problem this year. Just things like this. It is a stressful time, I think, and it's a time where we're told in adverts and stuff we're all meant to be having fun and having the best Christmas ever, and that's not the case for everyone. I mean, I like Christmas. I really like Christmas, but sometimes it can get a bit much, and I think you have to sort of take a step back and remember to embrace the important parts of it, to try and step away from the consumerism as much as it is fun to receive gifts and gift gifts. I think it is important to take a breath over Christmas, and this is, this book, we can find ourselves getting jaded and cynical towards Christmas, of just being like, oh God, here it comes again, and so I don't think we should feel too bad about having some negative feelings towards holidays in general. But it's when we let those feelings kind of overwhelm us, and it's when those feelings become routine throughout the year as well. We find ourselves getting cynical, jaded, sneering at, sincerity, things like that. This is what Scrooge represents, and Christmas Carol is Dickens's way of trying to kind of remind us to try and shake that off. Don't fall into it, because it is easy to just dismiss and be cynical, Whereas, what does that really gain you in the long run? You just miss out on some good times, really. It doesn't protect you much. And so, yeah, when I first read this book, I was kind of a bit surprised, a little bit shocked to find myself sympathising with Scrooge in some ways. Don't get me wrong, not to a total extent. There are some parts of the book that even on my most cynical days, I don't think, or I hope I wouldn't behave. But I think the genius of Scrooge as a character and why he's still in popular culture is because we can relate to him. Because sometimes we all get worn out, we just want to be left alone. So I think that's fantastic. If he was too much of a kind of villain, then it wouldn't work. If he was like evil, but we're presented with this character who is, he's a massive Scrooge, a massive grouch. He's not a nice person to be around. He's jaded, he's cynical. But then as the story develops, we begin to see why he's become that way. We see that through the Ghost of Christmas Past, the Ghost of Christmas Present, and the Ghost of Christmas Futures. And I think that's brilliant that we're presented with this character who seems to be one thing, and then the layers get peeled away and you see how he became the person he is at the start of the novel. And I think it really serves to help us to recognise our own negative patterns and to try and just be like, let's just have fun and embrace Christmas and treat it as a time to be nicer to each other, to be more generous, to be more giving, to look out for people who are, not doing as well as us, to give them a helping hand. And then, as I said earlier, it then extends that and says, try to do that all year long. And this is why I think it's a book I like to read every year if I get the chance, because it's kind of reminding me of that, reminding me to try and have a bit more of an open heart and not go through the year like that, and it's just a nice reminder, a gentle reminder, an entertaining reminder, just to try and, be a bit more open. I don't find it preachy at all. I hate preachy stuff in general. I think it's just a nice, gentle kind of, reminder to try and be a bit more open, a bit more giving, a little bit happier to embrace the holidays, And I think more than ever, it's a book that is fit for our times. I'm sure Christmas had its stresses back when it was written in the 1800s, especially with the chronic poverty that existed then. I mean, I know there's still great poverty in the world today, but generally in the West, I mean, you can still be poor, but still have like a roof over your head and stuff. Whereas, literally, if you got too poor in the 1800s, you were sent to a workhouse, which was pretty much a prison, really. I mean, just as bad. It was worse than a prison today would be, basically. So I feel like it's kind of a universal thing, this feeling of like, oh God, here comes a big holiday. But the pressure we have today, especially with Christmas, with advertising, television, toys, technology, it's just become this global like beast, hasn't it? And I think it is easy to become cynical about Christmas because of that, and about the holidays in general, because it kind of feels like it's less about goodwill to everybody, and if you're a Christian, about the birth of Jesus and stuff, and it's just become about consumerism. And I think this is a great book as well to remind you that it's not about that you don't have to go mad and spend hundreds of pounds or dollars or whatever and feed people a feast. It's enough just to exchange a few personal presents, even things you've made yourself. You don't have to buy anything. Have a bit of nice food, get together with people you love, and just enjoy each other's company. It doesn't have to be this massive blowout. And I think the book really helps to remind you of that, and helps to take away the cynicism a bit of Christmas, and remind you that it can be a really great time without going mad. So yeah, I think that's why I really like to read it every year if I can, just to remind myself of that, and to remind myself going forward into the new year. And I'm not trying to say like I'm perfect and that works and I'm just this great guy all year. I'm not. I need to remind myself, I'm running out by the end of the year. That's why I need to keep reading it. But it's just nice to try, isn't it? And I think if we all try, then wouldn't that be great? And wouldn't it just make a slightly better world? I also think, it's always been true, and it's especially true today, that the problems in the world seem so massive that how can we as individuals do anything about them? I mean, all year I've read headlines where I've just thought, that's terrible, but there's nothing I can do about it. And again, I think this book helps to remind you that you don't need to save the world on your own. If you just try and improve your little part of it, you can improve your part of it, and if everyone does that, then it will have a global effect. And again, I'm not trying to say like I'm doing that and I'm just this swell guy who improves my part of it and everyone around me is so happy. It's something we all have to constantly work at, but I think, again, as I keep saying, this is a good reminder of that. Now, obviously, some of you might be thinking, will I enjoy this book if I am not a Christian? Because although it's not a religious story, its foundations lie in Christmas, which is a Christian holiday. Now, look, I'm not personally religious. I sort of, obviously, I grew up in the West, in Britain, so I'm kind of most familiar with Christianity as opposed to all other religions, but I'm not a Christian myself, and I still really, really like this book. Even I can be very critical of religion when I see hypocrisy or bad things done in the name of religion. I can be very skeptical of it, but I still find nothing to complain about with this book. In fact, there's even a brilliant passage where Scrooge is talking to the ghost of Christmas Present, and he says to the ghost, so much bad stuff has been done in your name, and he's kind of saying, in the name of God, because this is essentially him trying to redeem himself from going to hell and stuff. And the ghost says to him, it's nothing to do with me. Do you know how many bad people do terrible stuff who say they're doing it in my name? They're not. They're not familiar to me. They're not one of my people. They're lying, basically. And I think that's a good thing. I often think, when I'm getting a bit deep here, but when you look at religion, they have very good teachings. Don't murder people. Try and be good. Try not to screw people over. And then it's more individuals who fall under the umbrella of religion or claim to be religious, or even are figures in that religious community, priests or whatever, who do terrible things. Well, they're not speaking for God or what that should stand for, are they? They're just kind of using that as a smokescreen. And I really like how this book addresses that. I really think, whatever your faith or lack of faith, you should give this a try, because I really don't feel like it tries to convert you or anything. If it did, I wouldn't like it. It's basically just about trying to be better to people and trying to better yourself and to try and enjoy life a bit more. And I think that's why it's endured and why it's so popular. As you can probably guess from the intro, my personal favourite adaptation is The Muppet Christmas Carol. I think that's really good. There have been so many, as I said. The Simpsons have done it, Blackadder's done it, Family Guy's done it. I mean, any long-running show, you can probably find some kind of homage to A Christmas Carol, an episode based around that. So if you just want to dip your toes in or something, look online, look on the Wikipedia page for A Christmas Carol. You'll find a whole list of all the parodies of it, and you can try there if you don't fancy going into the book. But the book is really short itself. I just read for a little bit each night, and I finished it in like 3 days. It's just over 100 pages long, I think, something like that, maybe even slightly less. But yeah, I just think it's a fantastic book, and I really urge you to check it out if you never have. Even if you're super familiar with the story, which we all are, I still think it's worth going back to the source to check it out. And I think it really does cement Charles Dickens, nearly said Darwin, Charles Dickens as one of the greatest writers ever. I mean, in my opinion, he's up there with Shakespeare, because I just feel like this book, he gives such a nuanced view of the human condition and the human heart, and how experiences can make us one thing, but how it's not too late. And I think that's an really important message in this, is the message of redemption, that it doesn't matter how far gone we are, you can try to better yourself. You can try to embrace the world and try and do good with your life. You know, it doesn't matter if you're a complete Scrooge. It's not too late. You can change. So yeah, Christmas Carol, absolute classic. You should definitely check it out. I hope you all have a really good 2021. I really hope that, as you know, a planet, things get a bit better for us all. And I'll see you next time. Stay safe.